So today we're going to go over the subjective pays tribute to the objective and how this here is probably one of the most fundamental processes in explaining the bias and corruption and the sort of self-interest of ideology and different cultures and different nations. And of course, the superego in you is going to say, well, this is bad and it should be purified, it should be eliminated or regulated out of existence. But aside from that selfish sort of interest, there's really no need to, it's really a feature, corruption is. Corruption is a feature, self-interest is a feature. Subjective objects. What is the subjective? It can be any perception at all. It can be the perception of an individual perception, or it could be a collective perception. So a society, or a culture, or a nation, or a collective based on any purpose, or it could be a race, right? An entire race. They will develop layers of subjective perception. And this perception here is going to spawn or create in their subjective intention certain objects in material reality that's going to be made in reflection to reflect their subjective intent. So you have both the individual and collective perception. And that is the subjective, and whatever manifests in the objective environment is going to take on the form of something that's larger and beyond the subjective control of this collective. So this individual perception could be any person, it could be self-bias in general, any agenda that this person has, generally the selfish intent of that person. Now, collective perception is a lot more interesting because it can spawn so many types of collective perception. You can have a perception of an entire nation, so the entire image of a nation, or the nation in the eyes of the subjects that make the individual subjects that make it up and give it legitimacy. Basically how the collective views itself. So on the one hand, you have your own self-awareness, right? Your own sense of self-criticism and self-awareness. There's going to be a collective version of that where the collective sees its own subjective perception and judges itself. So this is also where you have unmitigated selfishness and vanity and arrogance, right? You have patriotism, the unconditional worship of the national flag and the nation as a whole. And so you have self-criticism and also self-interest, unconditional, and the need for the subjective to unconditionally pursue its own self-interest. You have the collective of a race. You have the entire persona of a race. So if you see any race or particular ethnic group caring about their image and their quote-unquote rights, trying to advance their own safety and their own agenda, defending their image and their honor. That's the subjective collective of an entire race. And also you have other examples such as certain cultures and subcultures, groups that are joined together for whatever reason, religions, and certain ideological groups, right? These are all the superposition or the sum total of all of the individual perceptions that buy into a collective vision and a collective symbol. And these, the religious and the ideological symbol, then unite to form a collective perception. So what are all these objects here? Obviously, all of these objects here are interested in advancing their own subjective perception and fulfilling their very own unique version of an objective reality. And so this intent here is going to spill over into objective reality, right? This sum total of individual and collective intent is going to make a difference in objective reality. So those, it can never be completely separate. The subjective and objective are always going to remake each other in some way. And so the separation of these two is itself a subjective intention, right? The worship of sort of objective truth or material reality here is itself a subjective intent. It's something that any individual can choose to do or choose not to do. So all of these objects are going to create and find ways to carve up a space of the objective reality for itself. So these are going to manifest in, these are all going to have their own realm or domain of control. In a purely physical sense or material sense, any individual is going to have his or her home, or the place where they control the most. They have the most ownership. But it does not have to be, of course, material or physical, right? For example, ideology or religion is ownership of territory, but this territory is intellectual. Each of these objects are going to have their own time where they can possess objective reality well. They can possess objective reality in the best way. Whether it's, and we can also add scientific. So each of these here will possess their own subjective version of truth. They're going to spawn or create objects that are made to reflect their subjective self. So an entire nation, of course, creates a nation state in the national flag. Again, subjective location made into an objective symbol. And then you have particular subjective gods, philosophies, different ways of doing things that are special to this subject. You have various institutions that are created to fight for the rights of and advance the image of any particular race or ethnic group, racial or ethnic group. We can also add gender here. All of these objects are unique in a way, and they have certain things that they are and they are not, right? That's the nature of an object. Every object has boundaries, and so they have to protect those boundaries. And so they also are going to create certain narratives about themselves. They're going to create particular stories that they believe are true, that explains their past, right? So that goes for any culture, any nation or group. They're going to have a history. And these narratives are going to define how the subjective views itself and also projects itself. Every nation is going to have a grievance, right? As a way to say that we've been wronged in a certain way, and this is how we have overcome the wrongness. Every culture, every religion, and even gender, every one of these objects here is going to have particular grievances, right? Particular events that happen to it that caused the trauma that affects how it views its subjective self. And each of these objects are going to have a particular bias. What it views as dirty and what is pure, right? So for example, in terms of a race or ethnicity, it's everything that the race is and everything that the race is not. It's going to try to protect what is pure about it and its shape. Same with the nation, and also the gender. And same with the national perspective, and the religion, of course. Now we take all of this subjective intent and bias and selfishness, and the reason that they create this objective object or manifestation here is that in order to get what it needs and it wants, it has to somehow reconcile its own intent with objective reality, right? The objective reality that doesn't care about whatever any of these want. It doesn't care about the agenda of any of these objects. So these subjective perceptions here, including the individual as well, are going to have to find ways to sort of market its intentions to the universe. And that's where it spawns all of these here. It spawns various institutions and objects in its environment to sort of advocate for it. So, same thing with religious institutions and political parties. We have a particular way that we want reality to be. But we can't be too brazen to say, this is just what we want here. We have to find a way to make it sort of timeless or objective or larger than just a subjective intent or a subjective want. We create these objects to reflect what we want to do. And so this is how the subject here pays tribute to objective reality by creating various objects that are larger than life, that are larger than these itself. Same thing also at the individual level. The individual will buy into these larger objects here in order to fulfill its very subjective and selfish intentions. And why? Because simply the biased subject needs objectivity. If you covet the opposite of what you are, right? So if you are a limited and carnal and biased idealistic subject, you also inherently need this. You need this neutrality in order to say this here is the end of time. This is the end of searching and the end of trying to get to the ideal. And that's why all of these here, if you look at patriotism as well, why do people die for their countries? Just for a symbol, just for a flag. It's because this here represents to the subject the end of time, right? The reason for existence. Right here, complete lack of reason. And then it reconciles here and completes itself. And we can also say, sort of flip and do the reverse and say this is complete rationality, right? All you're doing is thinking of how to get what you want and how to exploit the situation the most and how to explain things in your own subjective terms. And this is the complete absence of reason or rationality, right? All of these, politics, religion, nations, philosophies, cultures, all of this is the lack of reason. And so the subjective here, spending all of its time trying to get what it needs, and in a state of scarcity and rationality, craves low complexity or the complete lack of reason. Existence without reason here, or the end of time. So as you can see, the subjective and objective remake each other in their own image. And also within that is the duality between the reasonable and the unreasonable. And that's how they reconcile existence.